welcome everybody to this current installment of the Protego Foundation Book Club. So we're going to continue nerding out and talking about Goblet of Fire today. And basically, we'll just touch on any of the topics that we didn't get to the last time. So if you feel like doing so, you can mention again what your favorite magical creature is that we are introduced to in the fourth book in the chat, and maybe where you're tuning in from, just to kind of get us going a little bit.
I think I said Dobby last time. I'll stick with
yeah.
Dobby's just number one of the whole series for me, but
I would actually say that the dragons were my favorite, and I felt really bad for them. So, yeah.
It's hard. I don't know. I love them all. I guess like the dragons also, because I think of like dairy or like cows used for dairy and just like exploiting like moms. And I just think like that sucks. So
yeah. Also, can we like just give a huge shout out to Allie for like her great artwork that she did on our discussion from last time. If you haven't seen it, check it out on social. Like she did a painting, I think in Procreate, of the discussion we had about like protesting for more people's rights in the Black Lake. And it is awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to do the dragon one and I kind of started drafting it, but I don't know. I feel like the dragon one was harder and I'm like very new at illustration stuff, like very, very new. So I did but it was fun. And like, I made they were like holding picket signs and I was like, they wouldn't hold signs. They would levitate them with their wands. And I was like, so proud of myself for that idea. Like putting like, they were just, Wingardium Leviosaing the protest signs, but anywho.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. I think my favorite last time was Pig as well, Mallory. So thank you for reminding me. Oh yeah, and the flying horses. Those ones are great. Yeah. So awesome.
Yeah, it just to one person, I think. I didn't know how to use the chat feature.
Oh.
This time I figured out how to tell everyone I like Pig.
We need to have a Colorado Protego meetup sometime.
There's so many people in Colorado. It's amazing.
Well, October, I'll be there for Leaky.
Yes, LeakyCon. Oh my gosh, yes.
That's happening.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, I can still go to Colorado and we can do a Colorado like Protego meetup with everybody.
Works for me.
That would be fun. All right, so thank you again for being here. I'm sure most of you know already, but we are the Protego Foundation. Anyone who's on the team has Team Protego after their name. Well, except for Allie, because she says the Protego Foundation. But so we're a 501c3 nonprofit animal rights organization whose goal is a wizarding fandom that is more considerate of the rights, feelings, and treatment of all creatures, regardless of species, size, or magical ability. But I'm sure you all knew that already. So yeah, we're also going to be doing some house points for Wizards for Environmental Protection campaign for the Forbidden Forest Challenge. So if you want to pop in the chat and put what your house is, then we can get some points going from this discussion towards the Sustainable House Cup. All right. So one of the biggest topics that we didn't get to last time, obviously, was house elves and S.P.E.W., which, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. It's a huge plot point in the book. So, yeah, I mean, like, honestly, if anyone has any thoughts to get us started on that, feel free to jump right in or raise your hand and let us know that you're jumping in. Yes. Molly, I think I see your hand.
So my initial thought of S.P.E.W is that, like, it's great that someone is making a change, but it kind of reminds me a little of, like, and not to say any uber-specific organization, but, like, animal rights orgs that only focus on one thing, right? I mean, that's what it is. So, because Hermione still eats meat. She's not talking about any of the other issues, just the elves. So it's good, but it doesn't seem to connect into other animal rights issues.
Yeah, I think my biggest issue with S.P.E.W is that Hermione, I mean, if Hermione was also 14 and, we all have our like angry activist moments, but she didn't include the elves used in houses like at all in the decisions that she made. And like, she didn't ask the community, of elves, like what they wanted. And that, turned into Winky, like being distraught, over her new situation and everything. And I think that when performing, when doing activism, it's a little bit different with elves using houses because they can speak English and we can understand them. And it's different, with dragons because you can't really ask them what they want. You do what, is in their best interest. But for creatures or any kind of like speaking, any kind of person or creature who's being, marginalized, you want to include that group in the activism and like they should be spearheading it. Like you shouldn't use your voice, like they have their own voice. And so that was like the biggest thing with S.P.E.W. that bothered me, I guess.
That's such a good point. And I love how you brought up that, when Hermione started it, she was 14. Like, and I think a lot of times, like, particularly when, Tyler and I started this organization, we were like, oh, we're going to use S.P.E.W. as kind of like a model for what we're doing. But like, reading the books again, it's like, well, actually, it's not maybe the best example. She's very young. She's in the beginning stages of like being an activist. So it's not perhaps the most well thought out thing. And you're right. Like she didn't ask them about what they want. And in fact, none of the wizards did. Because one of the points I wanted to bring up was that a lot of times when she would talk to other magical folk about this issue, all of them would come back with, this is what the house elves or elves used in houses want. They're happy. This is, what fulfills them. And it's like, did you ever stop to ask all of them that when they were very, like in the very first time that they were brought into someone's house to, basically be a servant? Yeah. So that's, anybody have any thoughts on like how that kind of relates to animal rights in our world? Because I feel like it's kind of similar, like people saying, cows are happiest when they're producing milk, that type of thing.
I think a lot of times we sort of anthropomorphize animals and kind of view them through a human lens. And so we kind of put on what we think, I guess looking at them through a human lens can cause us to believe things that aren't necessarily true, like the kind of, working, like people get bored, right? So we think, oh, animals get bored. So like giving, dogs, working dogs or police dogs or whatever, a job to do. And I'm not like advocating for or against that. I'm not, we'll move past that example, but like
topic.
Yeah, exactly. But like something like that, when we say like, oh, animals, like cows like giving milk, it's like cows, give milk when they're lactating because they were impregnated or because, so it's not like they do it because it's fun. They do it because it's like a natural process. And so, so I think it's a little bit different, but at the same time, it's dangerous to kind of put those kind of generalizations that we make based, through that human lens. And I think it also, going back to sort of the elves used in houses and advocating for other creatures, the sort of slippery slope of saying that animals are voiceless and like voice for the voiceless. And I know that that's a term that's used a lot, but like animals have voices, like non-human animals have voices. We just like silence them in a lot of ways and we don't listen to them. And it's used by humans, like that term is used by humans and not, outside of AR, I guess, to sort of diminish the extent to which the animals are suffering by saying like, oh, fish don't feel pain. Like they don't, like all of these things. So I think,
voiceless is not to like interrupt, but voiceless is used in AR by Anonymous for the voiceless, which many thoughts on that organization, but
like it's definitely used in AR. And I think it's problematic. And well, that word is also has lost a lot of meaning in the last couple of years, but like, Yeah. And we could, I don't want to get into a debate about what orgs are using the right terminology and stuff, but I agree. Yeah, animals aren't voiceless. They're silenced by human animals.
So what do we think are like the good parts about S.P.E.W or S.P.E.W? How in what ways does it work as an advocacy organization for elves used in houses, if at all?
I mean, it does have the fact that it's really the only thing we see of people actually, advocating on like any sort of animal or people's behalf. Like for the most part, everything else in the series, you don't really see anything else that's like for an animal. So it's like, even if it's not necessarily the best way of going about it, it's still one of the bits of the kind of pointing out that, hey, somebody from outside of this society where you were just sort of raised with this is normal is kind of pointing out that, hey, no, this shouldn't be normal. This seems bad. Why are we all just okay with this? Which you can kind of, extrapolate that out to a lot of more Muggle world animal rights issues. For instance, with meat and all that, like you're raised with, no, this is just normal. Like there's not a reason to question it. It's just, that's how it is.
Yeah. So do you think that maybe like because Hermione has grown up in the Muggle world, that maybe she's more attuned to these kind of issues?
I'd say, at least in my opinion, it's sort of more, you end up, at least more specifically with the elves, there are a lot of points where it's clearly meant to parallel particular real world issues, where like her whole thing is that's slavery. So it's she's clicked into it as an example of something that she has learned about as no, this is a bad thing. And this is the same thing I learned about as a bad thing, just in a slightly different context. That the rest of the world is going, oh no, that's not that thing at all.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on how S.P.E.W kind of works, or even, anything we haven't mentioned as to how it doesn't work as an organization?
I think it was just kind of Hermione's way of going about it. And I definitely could identify with her at some points. Just when you're a new vegan, you're usually, I feel like people are kind of angry, like an angry vegan. And you're just like, why does no one else care? So, like everyone else pretty much possibly knew already that there were elves used in houses down in the kitchens. But Hermione had no clue. And then the moment she found out, she was just not okay with it. And then just doesn't understand why no one else is like concerned. But she kind of went at it aggressively. And I think that an older Hermione might go back and reassess the situation and not try to do like all at once, especially like we were saying, the elves want to help out and have jobs. So instead of freeing them completely, just making their working conditions more fair, and especially for elves like Dobby, who are kind of, there's no regulation on them and he's being abused. In that sort of situation, there should be maybe a ministry group who can take care of that.
A self-union would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah. Additionally, I feel like just having this in the book is helpful for not the characters, but people reading the books, because it shows kind of just like what you can do if you want to start, just even if it's a small group at a school. Like if a kid is reading Harry Potter and maybe they want to start an animal rights group, but they have no idea how to do that, it kind of goes through the steps. Like you get people to sign up, you can make leaflets to educate people, and you can, make pins for people or whatever. So I think that it's kind of cool and unexpected to have it in the book.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's like any other like books or media for that age group that presented something similar, and I honestly can't think of one, especially from the 90s. So I feel like that was maybe like the first example for a lot of us when we were young of like any sort of activism.
Yeah, I think specifically like animal rights activism, because you have, you know, so many different fandoms offer like examples of rebellion, I guess, and like fighting back and resistance. And you have that in like Star Wars and Star Trek, and you have that in like Avatar, The Last Airbender. Like you have, it's a really common theme in these fandoms to sort of, again, like fight back and use, I mean, power for good, I guess. And it's always like a good versus evil. But I think in Harry Potter's S.P.E.W is like one of the only explicit like animal rights or like creature rights sort of thing. And I think, you know, it wasn't done the best way, but I, like Valerie said, I think older Hermione would go back, and I think she would like sit down with Dobby and Winky, and maybe she would like give them information on like how to unionize or something, or like do something a little bit, you know, less, you know, trying to free them by like slipping hats and socks and stuff around, because like that's not the right way to go about it. Again, she was 14, but like but I think it does offer, you know, the reader the like an example of how 14-year-olds or like younger kids can like see something that's wrong and like do something about it, which is really important.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's, I mean, I think for me when I was little, that was the first time that I saw that kind of activism like in any form. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I can, you know, make a point about what I want to say and try and make change in the world. But you're right, like when she was like leaving, or I don't even know if it was this book or in later books, with like leaving knitted stuff around for them to find. And it's like, that would actually probably be traumatic for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you have been, you know, led your whole life to believe that you don't want to be, or you shouldn't want to be freed by clothing, and then all of a sudden you're like finding this clothing popping up in front of you, like that might be actually really traumatic for them. And she could have learned that if she had a conversation with some of them. So
yeah, baby steps are important.
So obviously she like Hermione forced Ron and Harry to basically join, and then asked other people who declined, including Hagrid. But who do we think she should have asked that maybe would have said yes, whether they were like in Hogwarts or outside of Hogwarts already?
Luna. She didn't know Luna. Well, we didn't know Luna yet, but Luna would have jumped on that, I think.
I think so too.
Even Neville. Sorry, I'll let other people talk to you. I'm just like
I mean, I think also like just she might also have better luck with like going for more of like you know, Muggle-born, Muggle-raised people, just because these, you know, for the same reasons that she found it bad. Like she could probably bring those things up and sort of lean into the whole comparisons to the Muggle world that she had a problem with, whereas people who are wizard raised are more likely to have had it as an established norm that they would need to see other people kind of going, hey, why? To start to challenge.
Maybe she should have asked the Creevy brothers. weren't they Muggle-born as well? Yeah.
I was gonna say like her, like Dean and Luna would be like a fun team, and Dean could draw like signs and stuff because he is super artistic, and that would have been a cool tag team for.
Yeah.
Did she ask Lavender and Parvati? I don't remember.
I don't think so. At least the book didn't like explicitly say she asked this person, this person, this person. I think she like asked a bunch of Gryffindors who were kind of like, eh. And
Yeah.
I think it said some of the older ones like took the badges just to be nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Or something like that.
I feel like Lavender and Parvati are very like emotional, sympathetic people who would be like, "Oh, poor elves," you know.
And we know that Lavender is like an animal lover because she had a rabbit, and she was very distraught when it passed away. So like, I feel like if she had been asked in the right way, probably would have joined. I hate how Lavender always gets a bad rap. I think she's
I was gonna
nice
say
character.
like, the way that the author like wrote Lavender and Parvati was not. There's a lot of sort of not like other girls kind of tropey stuff, and like Lavender and Parvati are like the makeup and like shopping and whatever, like the girly girls is like weak. So I even if like JKR had included them, like Hermione asking them, I think they would have probably said no, and like just not that I think they would have, but just kind of that sort of like femme phobic writing that JKR did. So
yeah, I would be curious if she asked all the Weasleys and which one of them, like aside from the ones we already know said they wouldn't join, like maybe Charlie would have joined, like because he's like taking care of dragons, so maybe he'd be more in tune with like trying to make sure everyone's treated nicely. I don't know.
Yeah. Nick asked in the comments, what would have been a more effective strategy for Hermione to get people like Harry, Ron, and Hagrid truly on board? It's a good question.
It's a really
I don't know. We were like dumb 14-year-old boys at the time. So
yeah, I can't see Harry and Ron like ever caring.
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps because Hermione is a very like brusque and bossy person, like maybe the way she approached it was like natural for her, but was a little standoffish for other people, like, oh, you must join this. And I feel like we actually see that in animal rights activism sometimes anyways, and veganism, where people like are very like militant about, oh, you must do this, like you're a bad person if you don't do this, rather than coming at it with like, okay, here are some facts, and this is how it is, but this is how we think it should be. So maybe if she'd been just a little less pushy.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a good descriptive word for her, like the way that she's portrayed in the books is pushy, and when it comes to creating study charts or whatever, she's like, this is what we're doing. Like she always tells her boys, Harry and Ron, this is what we're doing and this is it. And I think that had she sat down and said, listen, this is a concern that I have, and like these are my thoughts, what do you think, kind of involving them in sort of the planning. I think it's important to involve other people and other voices in your activism, and I feel like Hermione wasn't quite there yet, in that stage of activism. So
I feel like maybe asking Dobby to be a spokesperson, maybe, and because nobody really ever sees the elves at Hogwarts, so if they all of a sudden were getting to interact with an elf, they might be interested in what they have to say. Plus, he's the one living through the experience, and he can tell them about his previous traumas that might invoke some more empathy than Hermione, who has a reputation of just being like a bossy know-it-all girl.
Which isn't bad, but it can turn people off sometimes.
For sure.
I've had experience with that.
If they would have maybe included Dobby in the discussion, maybe he knew some other house elves, not the house elves that worked at Hogwarts, because they seem to love their job and not be interested in being liberated. But maybe some of the other wizarding students and their families that owned house elves, maybe they would have wanted to get involved. Of course, we really only know about Dobby, who was truly terribly treated, and the others maybe weren't as badly treated. And like, I think it's in the second book, maybe, or a different book, that Ron mentions that Molly Weasley really wishes she had a house elf. And so we know that other families have them, mostly wealthier families, but just like lots of wealthy families have nannies and chefs and housekeepers, maybe they don't all treat them terribly, and that's why we don't know anything else about them besides the way Dobby was treated and the ones at the school. But maybe if they included Dobby, there would be some more knowledge and discussion.
Mm. I also like to think that maybe there were some wizarding families that like had house elves or elves used in houses, but like weren't completely terrible to them. They might actually be more willing to enter into a conversation about, okay, let's unionize or get them better, working conditions or wages. Like maybe if there was a wizarding family that, treated them as part of the family. Like we don't know that though, because that's not in the books. I also think that like Hermione probably only asked people that were kind of already in her like immediate circle. It didn't say a lot about, if she went to maybe the Ravenclaw common room and went around and asked people that she knew in there, or like, some Hufflepuffs. Or maybe there's, a kind Slytherin. Like, I feel like she kind of limited herself in who she also felt comfortable talking to. And maybe more people would have been willing to join if she kind of like branched out more. Potentially.
Yeah, definitely.
I was impressed with just the wording in the book sometimes. Like she said, the long-term aims of S.P.E.W was to change the laws about non-wand use and to get an elf into the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures because they were shockingly underrepresented. Like, that's very modern, I feel like. So, and I guess when I read this before, I didn't consider myself an activist necessarily, but now I'm just like, wow, that's really cool that that's in there.
Yeah. And like obviously she's very intelligent, and like the way she puts it is very like mature for someone who's 14. I definitely would not have had like the wherewithal to put it that way.
Yeah, but I feel like having just groups, for me personally, in high school, that's when I became a vegetarian. Someone I knew created an animal rights club, and like she knew about PETA. I had never heard of PETA, and she kind of just gave us the rundown on what goes on, and like I had no idea, and I decided to go vegetarian like that day. So just having someone to help kind of like educate and push you is very beneficial in a school situation. But I feel like maybe she should have talked to some of the teachers as well about it, just to learn more, especially if her goals were Ministry of Magic related. So they probably could have helped her out and given her some advice on how to go about her endeavor.
I just had this weird like headcanon moment where I felt like if Hermione would have asked as a Grubbly plank, maybe she would have like been totally on board with that and could have been like the faculty advisor or like ex-faculty advisor for S.P.E.W.
I had the same thought, but for some reason, and this makes no sense, and there's like no canon evidence whatsoever to support this, but it's my new headcanon, and that Professor Binns was like a secret like animal rights activist, and like he was so like bored, and like nobody knew anything about him, but he was like he would have spearheaded some kind of campaign. Like I wanted more from him, but don't know why I chose him just now in my head, but I did.
Hey, whatever works.
Nick has more questions. Oh, sorry. Valerie, were you going to?
I was just saying we have some good comments in the chat, which is probably what you were going to say too.
Yeah. Just were Hermione's goals for S.P.E.W too big? Did possibly aiming too high prevent smaller actionable change? Never apologize for spamming chat. We love. I think definitely. I don't know if necessarily too big. Probably too. Just like she had an idea and like ran with it. It wasn't like planned out so much. She didn't really think about the best ways. Like the other comment that you made, Nick, was like inclusion, targeting specific groups, fact-based information, these sort of like how we can use or like what best methods of activism. Oh, and I just saw Catherine, your mom left. I didn't even see her comment.
Oh yeah. we talked about this actually, like,
Oh, yeah.
in the book club, about how I was like, Hermione, her work with S.P.E.W. kind of contrasted with some of her other comments in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly with the Blast-Ended Screwts, where she like really didn't care what happened to them. She was like,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this quote, like, the best thing to do would be to stamp on the lot of them before they start attacking us all. Like, I don't know why I didn't catch that the first time I read this book, but that's very not like animal rights activist-y at all.
Definitely not.
The little speciesist.
Yeah. I also think that the fact that like elves use like human language, or like, I don't know, human language, but we share a common language. Definitely there's a lot of speciesism there. Because Hermione didn't say anything. Well, did she say anything about I honestly didn't read the book, so I'll admit that. I mean, I've read it, but not in like a year or two. So not like I've never read Harry Potter. But when like the dragons and stuff, like I feel like Hermione would have been not okay with that. Did she say anything about the second task or the first task?
I don't think so.
No.
Her thoughts on the dragons more had to do with why are they doing this to school children rather than why are they doing this to dragons.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think there's definitely speciesism there, and like obviously with the Blast-Ended Screwts, we see that Hermione really doesn't give, she doesn't care about certain creatures, and I think because like the elves and the wizard, humans speak a common language, but yeah.
That's a good point. Like, do we think that she would have really cared if house elves used in houses, didn't speak English? Like if they just, communicated by grunting or something and you couldn't understand them, would she be like, oh, whatever?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
She didn't say anything about mer people because, she doesn't speak Mermish. She couldn't communicate with them. So, but yeah, like a being activist more than a beast activist, Nick just said. And then, yeah, being beast classifications, Nicole also.
Very true.
Because also there were a couple of times, I mean, obviously she hasn't even considered dragons. She hasn't considered animals being killed for food, but like she would be going on about S.P.E.W. and then like it would say she shoved a spoonful of like roast beef in her mouth or something like immediately afterwards, and I'm just like, wow.
Yeah, what's that phrase that it's like
dissonance, like
cognitive
dissonance. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, speaking of the Blast-Ended Screwts, let's talk about those. So I mean, we've sort of talked about them a little bit with like the third task and everything. But once again, here we have Hagrid doing some damage by illegally crossbreeding some animals and not knowing the first thing about how to care for them. So any thoughts on that?
Sounds a lot like I feel like a lot of humans in the real world do that. They get fancy animals they don't know how to take care of. I mean, even people get certain dog breeds that they don't know how to take care of, and you think of dogs as like a pretty typical pet, but they don't necessarily research, the exercise needs of the dog and things like that. It's a very, very, very real
up
thing.
In the last meeting about French bulldogs and other animals like that are bred that shouldn't exist.
Yeah,
definitely. I know like that happens a lot. I feel like with reptiles or like smaller exotic pets and stuff. Like I have 3 hermit crabs. We just adopted another one. And they like people, you can get them at like a beach, like on the boardwalk or whatever. And like I've seen people carry them in these like tiny little metal cages, and like they say, oh, they just need 2 gallons of space like per crab. Well, I have 3 crabs in 110-gallon tank, I think. So they have a lot of room, and they have like layers, and they need salt water, fresh water, heating like pads or whatever they're called. And like people just think these creatures just need like food, water, and they're good, but they require so much more. And then another issue is that the people that we think should be sort of the go-to for information, like Hagrid, for instance, might not necessarily know or care enough on like how to care for these. So like people at like a pet store or even like at like a vet's office, I'm like choking on air. They might not know exactly what to do. So like the pet store might say, yeah, feed them like this food. Meanwhile, like this food is like toxic to hermit crabs. And the calcium sand that's like sold for hermit crabs at like PetSmart is like toxic to hermit crabs. Like they're not like they're selling these products and people don't question. And so it's just, I think we're given a lot of, like we're fed a lot of false information, and we like the students, there might be a student who cares about what they're doing to their, the animals and like care magical creatures, but they trust Hagrid because he's seen as like the authority figure and should know since he's the professor. But I don't know, I kind of went on like a pet trade tangent there, but yeah.
100%. Like pet stores sell the tiniest cages for like rabbits and they can't live in them. But like you said, why would they sell them if that's not what you're supposed to do? And definitely the employees don't always know. I used to be one and I didn't know how to take care of like all animals. So yeah, it's terrible.
That's a good point.
Too. I just keep thinking about beta fish.
Fish.
Mm-hmm. The way that beta fish are sold in those little cups.
And we can blame
hundreds of those, thinking that that's totally normal.
I know. We can blame the pet stores, but also it's up to all of us, especially with the internet and everything. Like growing up, I had plenty of companion animals and my parents never really looked up how to properly care for them either. And I'm like, now that I'm an adult and I have my own companion animals, I do so much research and I don't understand why you wouldn't.
Well, I know that when I got a companion animal when I was 10, it was a rabbit. He was so cute. His name was Toby. But basically the only thing available at the local pet store that spoke to how to care for a rabbit was like this tiny little antiquated book that now when I read it again, I'm like, all of these things are completely wrong. So like a lot of the resources that are available to people aren't always accurate, especially if you're getting them from like a chain pet store, because their goal is not the care of the animals, it's to make money by selling animals and by selling goods for animals. Yeah.
Also, the little pamphlet that came with my first hermit crab my friend bought for me from PetSmart said they live 3 to 5 years. Most people think they live like 1 or 2 years, and my boys will be 9 years old in December. So that just shows you with proper care.
Another example is like a goldfish. People think they're just disposable and they can live in little bowls, but no, they can live 20 years and they should have, 10 gallons at least per fish because they can grow up to over a foot long, but nobody knows that. Like, it's just amazing.
This is a great discussion. I'm curious, it's gotten into kind of personal responsibility a little bit. And I come from animal rights more from like an environmental side where I see more and more trending towards blaming the institution rather than the individual. Like, it's not your fault that you consume so much. It's these institutions that exist and you're kind of powerless. I see some flaws. I see both, truth in that and also some flaws that kind of that can kind of green light bad behavior. And I'm curious what everybody thinks on how to combat that. Or one, how common is that in the animal rights world of, kind of pushing away personal responsibility to blaming institutions? And then two, how do you combat that desire to blame something else than our own personal decisions and actions?
Those are good questions.
They're deep questions.
I feel like, and I did one campaign, one tour with PETA that was environmental focused, and I feel like just on like a IRL level and like not a Harry Potter level, that like there is much more pressure to change on an individual level in like the strictly animal rights movement, because there's all this talk of go vegan versus from what I know of the environmental movement, a lot more of it is like institutions. But vegan activists tend to be very like, here's what you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of activism starts out on, that sort of individual level. This is what you can personally do by like limiting your consumption of animal products, or, we hear that with the environmental side, like recycle and like turn off your water. But like in the grand scheme of things, it sucks that like that's not going to do as much as like, the top 10 corporations that are, creating all of it. And it's just, but it's at the same time, I don't want to be like, don't worry about recycling, don't worry about your water. Because like once we adopt that mindset that like individual actions don't do anything, that can be very destructive, I think, for and the same thing in animal rights. Like me being vegan for so many years or however many years isn't necessarily putting that much it's not really limiting greenhouse gases, like my specific way that I consume, because I still, have a car. I'm not in the city, but I have, I do all of these things. I still, so on the individual level, how much am I doing? But it's that sort of collective. I think it's just, it's tough, because I agree that like individual action, like little individual action doesn't do much, but when it's collective individual actions, and so it's a tough conversation, and a tough, I think it's just, you do what you can and the most that you can, because it does all add up.
Yeah. And like, I think it's like, we know that, our one individual action by itself is not going to do much, and that there has to be like a balance between focusing on like individual action and, like putting pressure on corporations and governments to do their own things to create change. And yeah, Nicole says she thinks it's also a little bit how much is the cause, like for environmental or animal rights, tied to end user actions, like how much good can we do with our individual actions. And actually that kind of like, I feel sometimes actually holds people back a little bit from deciding to join the animal rights movement or going vegan or trying to work for environmental rights causes, because they do fall into that myth of like, well, my one action is not going to do much, so why do I even bother? But I think what Allie said is key. Collective individual actions do have an impact, and they do create change. But yeah, no, those were great questions. Very deep questions.
In individual activism, there can still be a lot of community grown out of that. Like individual, like Protego Foundation was formed because of individuals who like shared this common idea. And a lot of like grassroots organizations are the same thing. And it's this sort of this coming together of similar concerns and and of these like bigger issues. And it's in the community building that sort of, can take root and then even grow farther from there to create more change, I guess.
Yeah. That makes me hopeful that like in the post like 7 books Potter world, maybe S.P.E.W could have become something like bigger and like gone on to do other or work with other issues as well, not just house elf or elves used in houses and their welfare. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the Screwts? I personally felt really horrible for the Screwts. I mean, I think they're described as being very ugly, which probably means that a lot of readers are just like, whatever. But I felt really bad for them, especially because I think they started out with like 20 and then by the end of the year there was only like one, which that's kind of sad.
Well, that Screwt went on to star in the Wizarding World ride. I don't know if y'all have been on it.
No, not yet.
Oh my god. The best ride, I'm just saying.
I guess my question is, how do you get through to people like Hagrid that are well-intentioned, that have a devout love for animals of all types, presumably, yet, facts, appeals to emotion don't seem to work to get him to think through his decisions and to think through his treatment of these animals?
I feel like no one really challenges him to think deeper into it. Maybe not counting S.P.E.W and Hermione, because he kind of just brushed that off. But I think that especially even with a lot of people in the Muggle world, like if you sat them down and you said, do you think that it's right for animals to suffer in these ways? They would say no. And then like if you just have to kind of like hold their hand and explain to them step by step how they are impacting these creatures negatively, then they would be like, oh, I never thought of it like that. And I think it's the same with Hagrid, where he's just doing what he wants, but he's not seeing it from the creature's perspective. And if you just explain, like, if you really love these creatures, you want them to be as happy as possible, right? So like think about what would make them as happy as possible, not what would make you happy. But I don't know who would take the time to do such a thing.
Going off of that, we've talked about Hagrid as sort of his idea of loving animals and loving these creatures is more of a sort of as like to showcase them and like for his collection sort of, and like look at this cool animal. And he doesn't necessarily love these creatures and respect them for, having their own autonomy and like as being their, being creatures that I guess, but he sees them more as, this is a really cool, like he doesn't see the danger of animals because he's like, this is just really cool, and I think that maybe coming to Hagrid with that idea of thinking, like Valerie said, sort of these creatures on like individual levels and more, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but sort of seeing them as more like worthy of respect, I guess. I think that's this concept that he could kind of get behind, because these are really cool creatures. Don't you want them to, stick around, and don't you want to treat them, and give them all of the, their basic needs and like care for them the way they should be cared for, and sort of kind of reframe. I think like working on getting Hagrid to kind of reframe the way he sees these animals would be a good first step, so that he could extend that to not just these are cool animals and like we should like them, but like we should see them for more than just pieces of like a collection or something to like show the students.
Yeah. I think it would be great if Hagrid could have like a mentor in the magizoology world, like Newt Scamander, to like come and sort of like, I guess, bring him up to snuff on like a lot of care of magical creature things and like, respecting these magical creatures and, all this type of stuff that he, like Hagrid seems to not have been well versed in. Kind of give him more of a basis in like how to work with creatures respectfully and not see them as like commodities. Because I feel like Newt kind of embodies that in a way, like the kind of non-objectification of the animals that he's working with.
Yeah, like for Hagrid, it's more sort of petting zoo-ish, and then for Newt, it's sanctuary, sort of like that kind of difference, I think.
Yeah, and I think at that point, Newt's still around during the 7 books, so it would have been out of the realm of possibility for him to like pop in and be like, hey, let's have a chat. Let's talk about how your class is going and how we can improve it, I feel bad because we always like harp on Hagrid But I think maybe he just hasn't had the opportunity to learn and be presented with, you know, the information that he needs in order to be a better magical creature caretaker.
Yeah, agreed. I think that he would do well if it was a situation like dragons are going to go extinct or something. He'd be like, even if it's selfishly, like, oh no, I don't want dragons to go extinct because I think they're cool and I want to look at them. Okay, well, like whatever works to
I mean,
advocate, you know.
That's how a lot of people engage with animal rights causes in our world too. Like, oh, this animal's cute and I don't want it to go extinct, so that's why I'm going to support this cause.
Right.
Which, you know, any way you can get someone to support an animal rights cause, you know, whatever, more power to you. So, but that's, you know, I can see that happening. Like, he would actually be definitely one that would always probably get involved in like the animal rights causes that other people wouldn't, because he's all about like the big, scary, not quite so nice looking creatures as well. So even if other people didn't care about them going extinct, he probably would if it was presented like in the right manner to him. All right, well, enough about Hagrid and Screwts. I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple other things, including Mad-Eye Moody using the spiders in the class where he talks about the unforgivable curses. So, I mean, I was personally very traumatized by that scene, even though I'm not exactly like the biggest spider fan. Full disclosure. But I'm curious to know what everyone else thought about that scene, and kind of, especially like when the class, you know, laughs when the spiders are made to do things that are unnatural for them. Like, yeah, it was just, to me, it was sad to kind of see that. But does anyone else have any thoughts on that particular instance? Yeah, Nicole.
So I think, because one of the ones is for me that was also just like, I don't know, like extra creepy. Because okay, so I'm gonna start this off with an anecdote and then get into why. So like my grandmother's Scottish, and apparently like in Scotland there is actually some like superstition that is effectively the itsy bitsy spider, but it's just sort of like, oh, and it gave this guy hope, and that's why we have a Scotland. So apparently like in Scotland it's considered like really bad luck to kill a spider. Just kind of wanted to start out with like, you know, so it's just sort of like, one, even just like culture they're in, that was kind of a weird move to go with. Two, I get like, you know, the idea of having a bunch of children watching a insect, like even an insect like writhe around in pain, like it's like, even if you don't like a thing, like you don't normally like watching it in pain, and then it's just kind of like, in terms of the using it for the like dancing, it just kind of becomes a bit of like, how, I guess also, does each spider have to do all of the things? Like, does he turn dancing spider into torture spider later? Like, because that's the thing that always kind of like upset me more, is like, is there just one spider who his whole day is, I'm just going to torture you over and over again for every single class, while your friend gets embarrassed and we bring in a new one to kill every period. And it just kind of becomes a why and how, and like, it's just sort of like, also, even like most spiders aren't that big. Like, even if you're trying to do a demonstration, like, that's not really a like, that's not something that's actually like showing most of the class anything. Like, you're really freaking out the people at the front because, one, for Neville, you're making him relive the trauma of what happened to his parents through the bit of through a spider, and then just kind of like, otherwise, you know, embarrassing the spiders if they can be embarrassed, but we'll go with that. And then just kind of like sudden death to spider, and it's something where, for most of those, like, you can just kind of explain it. Like, the only other one is kind of the only one that, explaining doesn't really work as well is probably the Imperious, which he later just goes and does on all the students anyway. So, like, showing them, here's what it looks like on a spider, doesn't actually teach them anything that they're not going to be learning. It's just hurting a spider.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of like biology labs where like things can be learned without dissection, but like people still go ahead and do it anyways. Like you could learn about all these curses in a book. You didn't have to demonstrate them on a living being for them to, like, for the kids to recognize the drasticness of these curses. But I love that comment where you're saying, like, what if the spiders are embarrassed? Like, I mean, who are we to say that they don't have feelings and they don't, feel embarrassed about being made to tap dance or whatever, or like dance around in the desk? Like, and maybe that is traumatic for them. Like, sitting in a jar wondering, oh, am I going to be next? Am I going to be made to do something? Am I going to be in pain? Am I going to be killed? Like, I also feel like this, I mean, obviously the lesson plan was not put past any sort of like regulation or Dumbledore, like in order to put it into the classroom usage. Like, what I'm surprised by is that none of the kids like made a complaint about it either. Like to the powers that be.
Well, they're also used to like potions class where they have to cut up creatures all the time, and they're probably very desensitized.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And actually, that's probably why Fake Moody like took Neville aside and tried to like console him, because maybe he thought that Neville was going to actually make a stink about what happened in the class, which that would have been great. Go Neville.
This is a great topic to bring up, Catherine. I didn't even think about it and the spider example as part of this conversation, but it's really interesting because it kind of proves, at least in the wizarding world, that spiders can feel pain, which is something that a lot of people in the Muggle world still argue against, that non-human animals can feel pain. And two, that spiders do have some sort of emotion, because I think in the text it says something like the final spider seemed to know what was going to happen before it was killed, and that both Neville and Harry felt something upon seeing that, but they didn't feel it. They didn't, in my interpretation, they didn't feel it for the spiders. They felt it for their own human parents. So that despite all of this, and then Ron just is kind of like, oh, and then that last spider, you just snuffed it like that. It's really fascinating that they didn't, that example, that witnessing this other animal in pain and dreading death, it didn't cause a more sympathetic reaction from any of the students. I thought it's a very poignant scene in that context.
That's such a good point. Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, their thinking is still very human centric, even though they're looking at an animal being abused in front of them. They're still seeing it only through like a human lens of, oh, this happened to my parents. Which, I mean, that's fair. Like, trauma does that to a person, and it's natural that they would look through that lens. But that's such a good point, that like they weren't really registering the spider's pain so much as like their own pain related to their family situations.
Yeah, I think we also see that in when making comparisons, like if someone's like, well, that, like, activists could say, and I'm sure I've said it before too, and like, that pig, what if that had been your dog or something? And it's like, okay, like, cool, if it had been your dog, that would be bad, but it was the pig, and that's also bad, and sort of making those sort of those comparisons that, you know, that pig was deserving of care and compassion and respect in their own right. They don't have to have been somebody's companion animal to warrant, you know, protection and liberation. So, and it's a little bit different because it's, you know, these kids, these literal children, you know, thinking about their parents like dying from the killing curse and being, you know, suffering from the Cruciatus curse. So it's like, it's a little bit different, but it is still centering another being and kind of like projecting that onto another being to justify like the fact that those curses are bad. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, those are great points. And what the question it raises for me, Allie, is how can you reach that person? If you say, well, just imagine that was your dog, then how would you feel? And they're like, well, it's not my dog, it's a pig, so we good. Like, how do you respond to that in a way to get them, you know, because you're trying to get them to empathize, to feel their personal experience, which is a tried and true method of creating some sort of personal connection. But what happens when they just say, when they can't draw those lines? How do we draw those lines for these people, I guess?
Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that. I mean, I think that a lot of times, and if we're talking about pigs specifically, I know it's like a broader question, but you can bring in different ways to make these comparisons between the animals. But again, that's kind of solidifying the whole, like for instance, pigs, people say, oh, well, they're very intelligent and they, you know, have the intellect of like a 2-year-old child or something. But then that also causes issues because then it's like, okay, and a chicken maybe doesn't have the intellect of a 2-year-old child. Does that make them any less worthy? And so then when we bring up the whole, you know, capacity and that kind of utilitarian approach to like who is worthy of rights and is intellect, what we like, where we draw that line, is it capacity for understanding or for love or for life or for future thinking or for all of that. And but I don't know. I think you just shake the person and you hope for the best. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. And I think it's kind of like on an individual level, probably. Sorry, what, Catherine?
Well, no, like you basically just said what I was saying. Like it's based on the person. Like some approaches will work for different people.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time people who say things like that probably haven't ever really met a pig or spent time with them. So if you can find a sanctuary to take them to and just spend some time with pigs, they'll realize that they're very similar to dogs.
Yeah, definitely. The number of times I've like pulled out my Instagram and showed the countless videos of Danny the turkey to people when they're like, oh, birds, whatever. I'm like, well, look at her and like, listen to her and look at us, you know, and just kind of, I think that's a good point. Sanctuaries. One of my old bosses used to say sanctuaries are vegan makers, because you can have all the facts, you can have all the figures, and you can kind of compartmentalize and, you know, sort of justify your actions. But then when you're face to face with an animal and you can make that connection, like the reason people, you know, in our society don't eat dogs is because people have companion animal dogs and they know them and they, you know, can make these connections and they see like the I don't know, the love and the wisdom and the, you know, there's dogs are people, you know, but people don't think of pigs as people because they don't know them. And I think also proximity has a lot to do with it, and like placing an animal, like animals in certain, you know, physical spaces, and then we place them in a like metaphorical, you know, distance. We distance ourselves from them. One of my professors wrote, maybe he didn't, he just recommended it, something like animal spaces and something places. I might have sent that to book club people. But then he also wrote a book called like the Urban Pigeon, I think. And he talks about like rats and pigeons as sort of like dirty animals and that kind of like pest. And that's a really interesting, because they're very close in proximity to people, especially in cities. Like we're surrounded by them, but there's still this kind of like othering and this distance that we put between them because of the just sort of where we, I guess, placed them. That got a little off topic, but yeah.
No, that's totally still on topic, because actually on this issue of, you know, people not seeing animals who they haven't come into like close contact with as like other, and not as, you know, like how they would see like a companion animal like a dog. I've had this argument with so many people about how rats are like the cutest, sweetest, most loving beings ever. But because people haven't ever seen or been around one, they're like, ew, no, gross, like rats are disgusting. And I'm like, you know, I grew up with 2 rats in the household for a few years, and you know, maybe that's why I don't see them that way. So I think anytime that you can bring someone to a place where they can meet those animals and get to know them, then maybe they'll start to see them as you know, on the same like level as like, you know, dogs or cats or whatever. So yeah, sanctuaries, great, are great for bringing people to, and even like rescues and stuff like that. Because there's also the issue of, you know, certain dog breeds are seen as like not being as worthy of you know, rights and stuff like that. But if people just went to a rescue and went to go meet them, they would see, oh yeah, these pit bulls are actually really, really sweet. You know,
Yeah.
people just need to have experience with those animals. And I think that's just a very human trait. You know, if something's not in our realm of experience, we don't understand it, or how, you know, we don't understand how these animals could be worthy of the same rights that we have unless we kind of have been around them and experienced them. And that's, I mean, it's sad that that's the way things are, but I feel like for a lot of people, that's how it is.
Yeah, I even have a friend who has chicken companions, and they're just companions. I don't even know if they eat the eggs, but she still eats chicken, and I just can't get past like how. And it's like, because these are the chickens she personally knows, she would never hurt them and she loves them, but she will still eat other chickens, and it just makes no sense to me.
Oh, that's weird.
I think watching, as horrible as it is, but like slaughterhouse footage and stuff, I know it's nobody wants to, but I think it's very effective. Like if you could force everyone to watch it, I feel like it would definitely change some people's minds, because you can't unsee it. But
yeah,
I think,
well, that's why I became vegetarian. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I get this. I agree with all these points. They're great, and I love this conversation. So I get the sense that this is completely anecdotal, that a lot of people know that if they were to visit a sanctuary, if they were to connect emotionally with a cow or with a chicken, then they wouldn't want to eat beef or chicken. So they almost purposely avoid doing those activities because they're afraid of a lifestyle change. It's just like Harry and Ron, I think deep down knew that house elf slavery was wrong, but they were like, Hermione, we have homework, we have Voldemort to kill, like, come on, give us a break. So I'm asking these huge questions, but I think they're the questions I'm really fascinated by is, so how do we get people to remove those barriers and be willing to open themselves up to that change that they know they really should do deep down?
I think, well, first of all, knowing someone who's gone through that change is probably one of the biggest things. And who's gone through the change of, you know, examining what they, you know, want to stop consuming in their own life, in terms of like, you know, whether it's veganism or environmental reasons for not eating animals. I think once people see their friends doing that sort of thing and like thriving in that new lifestyle, I think that's the biggest endorsement, to get people to sort of move out of their comfort zone and try changing their own lifestyle. Because you're right, like it's very, very daunting. And I think that's actually a really good point, because I mean, Ron and Harry, they are decent people. and they are compassionate, and like maybe what you said is true. Maybe they were just so bogged down with other things in their life, they just didn't want to, like, you know, deal with something new or making a change. But yeah, I think definitely like having someone who's like in your life as a good example, and who shows you that this new lifestyle is, you know, easy or acceptable, or, you know, you can make it work. Like, I think that's probably the biggest thing for me anyways. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I can say I was one of those people when I was vegetarian for a better part of a decade, and my cousins still remind me that I claimed I would never go vegan, and I said it like I didn't think there was any point. So I purposefully put on blinders so that I didn't see what was wrong with the dairy and egg industry. And, you know, a couple of years went by and I did finally become vegan, but I swore I would never become vegan. And at the time I didn't have any friends who were vegetarian. And so I was like, I'm doing enough. Like, this is good enough. So I can totally understand why Harry and Ron and the rest of the students and other people thought, like, I've got a lot going on, because I personally swore that I would never do it. And now I'm like, I don't remember saying that. And I can't believe I ever said that. And that, but I don't have anywhere else to go at this point, but that's it.
Yeah. I would add, I think it's important in activism and in, you know, sharing and you know, spreading this kind of, you know, these messages and stuff to kind of get people, I always say, get people where they're at, and whether somebody's coming from a health perspective or an environmental concern or like social justice, you know, with undocumented immigrants being like one of the highest numbers of slaughterhouse workers, and, you know, kind of human centered things, like kind of figure out where that person is coming from and what they, you know, if it's not going to be animal rights that gets them in, talk to them about another issue that's related to animal agriculture and how it's all connected. These like systems of oppression and how, you know, they're linked, and sort of the idea of like collective liberation, I think, is really important, to kind of, again, like I was talking to somebody from the Humane League a couple years ago, and he put it as like sort of like a Jenga game or something, and like each of those little blocks is like something to do with animal like liberation, I guess, and whatever like piece that you don't know like what piece it's going to be that, like, you know, not like say like tear somebody down, that sounds like really bad, but like what piece is going to like knock them and be like, you know, get them to understand and see where you're coming from. So I guess just really, again, I think it all comes back to the individual level. Like for me, watching a slaughterhouse video probably wouldn't have, I mean, I honestly didn't know about the dairy and egg industries. I really thought that, like, you didn't have to, I was like, you don't have to kill the chicken to get the egg, you don't have to kill the cow to get the milk. Like, I didn't know. And I don't think that I was avoiding knowing. I just think that I didn't know. But I know that I had to like watch the slaughter. I don't know. I think that some people react, again, it's individual. I think for some people that might do it. For other people, reading a book or learning about, you know, the water usage that it takes to make like one hamburger, or, you know, just all of like little things, or how animal agriculture is, you know, X% higher for like global gas emissions than, you know, transportation and all of these things. There's different ways to get to different people, I guess. So sort of meeting them where they're at and trying to figure out which one of those Jenga pieces is going to work for them.
For sure. I think kind of like we already touched on, for a lot of people, it's just about convenience. Like they don't want to change their lifestyle and they're afraid to do it. So if you just show them like, hey, you can buy these really cheap, really amazing, I don't know, for example, Beyond Burgers, because everybody kind of likes those. And you feed it to them and they're like, oh, you're telling me I can, they just don't believe it until they actually experience it. Like, I can still have good food and it's cheaper and it's better for the environment. Like, once they don't have any arguments against it, then they'll be more open to it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's kind of, both of my roommates are vegan, and I said something the other day and like, being vegan like sucks sometimes. And I was like, I would never say that like outside of this apartment, but it was because I went to a restaurant and it was like, do I want like steamed broccoli or do I want French fries that may or may not have been cooked with like animal fat? And it's like, you know, like those little situations where, so I think it's showing people like just having a smile, and sometimes it's hard, but just showing them, like you all said, like that veganism can be easy. And like, it's, I mean, it is easy. Like I've been vegan over 7 years now. I don't even think about it anymore. I mean, I think about it a lot because I literally work in animal rights, but like, I don't think about it in like a, you know, negative way. And I think just showing that kind of, I was listening to the 9 3/4 episodes of the Chick Peeps podcast the other day. And one of the hosts said something about kind of how Hufflepuffs would probably be the vegans who would kind of like teach people like, this is how you can like eat vegan food and like be happy, and kind of like hold the hands like through, you know, there's different kinds of activism and like attractivism and everything. And I think just kind of signaling, you know, how happy and how easy and how beneficial it is to the humans, you know, non-human animals, the planet, like everyone else said. So yeah, these are amazing questions.
Yeah, thank you for asking all of these.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'll expand on what I've put in the chat, and that full disclosure that I became a vegetarian last December, so a year and a half or so ago. You know, after going through kind of different stages and understanding all the issues, I've understood the issues. I've had emotional connections with the issues for multiple years, and I'm still not vegan. And I think to what Valerie was saying, I think the reason why I still have that barrier to going that next step is this feeling of loss of what I know. And I think that's a really, for me, it's a difficult thing. It's something that's preventing me from making this change that I know is the right thing to do. Morally, my own principles, my own values tell me to do this thing. Yet my mind and my heart say, oh, but you'll lose something if you do it. And I think while I think I've tried to make steps towards minimizing my impact, towards doing what I think is right. And I think there are a lot of people who are farther back in the road that have the same fears as that I'll lose something in the process. I'll lose part of my identity in the process, even though it would be more aligned with my actual values if I actually made this change. It's a paradox, and I think being human is just full of these paradoxes, and that's why I think, to circle all the way back to the S.P.E.W conversation of like Hermione being overly militant or, you know, like in your face about it, that, you know, people take different amounts of time and different ways of kind of coaxing them in, and it's not that they don't want to change, but we have to kind of hold their hands in making that change, which is a difficult thing when we see the urgency of the issue. You know, another life lost is too many. I mean, and I know that, like, right? Yet I still make these choices that are contrary to that knowledge.
Yeah, I think what Valerie put in the chat, just having a group of like-minded people. I mean, you may be losing sort of what you're used to and your customs, and, you know, just kind of going about your day without having to think about it, you know, but you'll also, and not like you, I'm not like, come on, Nick, but like society, anybody who's like in that position is also gaining such an amazing community. And I really feel that, you know, where I am, at least in the city, there's, you know, like I said, my roommates, like all the people in my like cohort at NYU, the previous internships and jobs I've had, and it's grown from like animal rights into this like social justice, like let's just like burn down the world and like rebuild it better sort of thing. And it's a beautiful community. And I think that showing, you know, what you can gain from it that's a really good point. Just showing that you're not losing. I mean, you are losing, but it's kind of shifting. It's more of like a shift to like a new normal sort of situation. And just showing that you can have, you know, again, I keep going back to like Hufflepuff, but like they made a joke on Chick Peeps that was like, no one, you know, they're like right next to the kitchen. So they're probably the ones showing like, look at all this awesome vegan food, and look how like you can still have all of like your favorite snacks and treats and stuff. And I think just showing that though things might change, there's like so much bigger I guess there's like a bigger world out there that, that you're yet to tap into. And I think it's, yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that you'll find that, oh, sorry, Catherine, just real quick. I think you'll find that most,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, most people in this community, most vegans are like really interested in helping people like you who are interested. Like, I'm just like, please join our Discord. Like, I want to talk to you more. And I mean, for me, I might not be vegan right now if I didn't have my husband who wanted to do it with me. I always saw it as like this like really like long-term achievable goal that was going to be really hard, but having someone to do it with me made all the difference. And I can tell you, like, it's the best decision ever. And so when we want to help other people become vegan, it's not for our like agenda for necessarily. It's more like, I know how it feels to be vegan, and I've never felt happier or just better about myself. So I want other people to feel that too.
Yeah, like that's, to me, anything I lost was immediately outweighed by gaining not only a sense of community, but a peace of mind, like feeling like there was a weight lifted off my shoulders that I wasn't going to be participating in any sort of like speciesism or industry that contributed to slaughter anymore. And also, like, as a vegan, like there's so many different foods I would have never thought to try that like I've tried only because I'm now in this community that has all these amazing, recipes and ideas, including Harry Potter recipes that are vegan, which are great. So it's hard to think of it as not losing something, but I do feel like you gain so much, even if you're just, making the transition from eating meat to being vegetarian. Like, there's a lot to be gained, I think, from each step in the process. But it's definitely, it's a personal journey, and I never want people to like feel bad about where they're at in their journey. So I'm just like, you know what, you do what's right for you, and if that means taking longer, that's worth it. It's totally worth it, because we never want someone to like automatically be like, oh, I went vegan, but I wasn't sure about it, and it was a whim thing, and then they didn't do it properly, and then I've heard like all those celebrities that like go vegan and then go back because they're like, it wasn't, I felt sick, and I'm like, well, okay, you didn't like do your research beforehand. But that's another topic.
I swear I didn't eat a vegetable until I became vegan, like corn and potatoes. I grew up like after I became vegetarian, I ate like Fruit Loops and mac and cheese, and like for like a decade. And then I became vegan, and I was like, okay, well, what do I eat? I guess I'll try vegetables now. Like, and then I found avocados and like so many amazing things. And I'm a chef. Like, now that's what I do for a living. Like, I cook all day, every day, and make vegan versions of traditional food. And like, I can't believe that I used to live on what I ate. I survived. Nobody was worried about my nutrition, by the way, when I ate Fruit Loops and mac and cheese for my whole life. Now that I'm vegan, it's a concern.
Yeah. That's actually something I always wonder about the Harry Potter books, is like they eat a lot of non-nutritious food. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like, who's watching out for your nutritional needs right now?
Yeah, I've never been as enthusiastic about food as I am now being vegan, because it's like so much fun to find all of the different things, and you kind of want to prove to people that it's just as good. And it is. I mean, we're saying like losing things, but you're really not. It's really just making think of it as like you're just eating a different brand of it, because I have eggs every weekend. I eat burgers every Friday. Like, it has cheese on it. I have milk in my cereal every morning. There's nothing that I've lost. I'm just using a different brand, and that brand is not harming animals.
Yeah. Good point. And there's so many more like options now than there were like even 5-6 years ago. So sky's the limit.
Yeah, when I went vegetarian, I was 8. I think it was like 18 years. No, yeah, 18 years ago. Wow. When I went vegetarian, and there was like nothing. Like there was like some Morning Star, but it was all vegetarian stuff. And again, I wasn't really in the vegan mindset at that point. I didn't really know what that was. But it was, yeah. And like cheese, vegan cheese has come a really long way, and it still has some way to go, but like it's going better than ever. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I again, I really appreciate this conversation and the inclusivity of it all. I think it makes me think of the accessibility of these. You know, I think that a lot of these new options are the best transition or pathway to vegetarianism, veganism for the bulk of the community out there. And it, you know, and the promise is that eventually vegetarian-based plant-based diets will become cheaper than meat-based diets, especially once we remove subsidies and things like that. But that's not right now. Right now, it costs me triple to have eggs on Saturday, vegan eggs, than it does, you know, cheap Walmart eggs. And I'm willing to make that investment, or I'm hoping that I get to the point where I'm willing to make that investment. But I always wonder about, well, my sister of, you know, three, you know, a single mom with 3 kids, like, can she make those changes without having such a drastic lifestyle change? I can still have vegan eggs on Saturday. They might have to, as a family, completely change their lifestyle in a way that it is a more radical change. And again, it's like you say, Catherine, everybody's at a different point in that journey. And that's why I think it's great that you are also inclusive and accepting wherever people are, because I think that's the way to, again, circle back to Hermione and S.P.E.W. Like, how she gets Harry and Hermione on board is not by bullying them into it. It's not even by telling them the facts about slavery and the like. It's the baby steps of saying, look, like, you like Dobby, maybe we should help Winky. And then maybe after Winky, we should help somebody else. Like, it's those sorts of steps that it's unsatisfying for somebody as woke as Hermione, but it's how you get people, like you said, Catherine, to fully invest rather than to just jump on the bandwagon and then fall off it right away.
Definitely.
That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah. And I know, sorry, we're like running out of time, but I just wanted to add the whole like accessibility to food is a really big issue. And, you know, I've gone through stages where I'm like, well, everyone should be vegan and everybody, but like, that is it's not the way to spread this, because a lot of people can't afford to pay. And because of those, you know, government subsidies for, you know, animal ag, and, you know, a Big Mac costs $1 versus a salad that costs 12 or something. Who am I to say, you know, that people have to do this? And also people living in, you know, countries where, or like areas where their carbon footprint is like minimal compared to mine, even though I have, you know, a vegan or plant-based diet, and then, you know, they're hunting and fishing and everything. So it also comes down to that idea, Nick, that you brought up, kind of that environmental, the individual thing, you know, like the bigger companies that are causing those issues. And yeah, but I mean, I could keep going, but I'm not going to, but, next month we'll start with this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to end on, that like everyone needs to be like met where they're at in their journey, and like each individual choice that we make can make a good thing happen, like when it's done collectively. And yeah, so yeah, we did kind of run out of time. There was so much more I wanted to talk about. So please join our Discord, because we can have more discussions about all these other things, like the animal mascots in Quidditch and Nagini as an animal in the context of this book. Like, there were so many other things I wanted to get to. But seriously, like, thank you all for being here. Sorry, Allie, were you going to say something?
No, I was just laughing at like we kind of derailed, but also these are such important conversations.
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah, if you want to learn more about us, if you don't know enough already, because we always throw stuff at you anyways, you can visit our website. And yeah, the best way you can figure out, you know, what actions you can do next to help magical creatures and the creatures in our world is by joining either the Discord and or the Protego Foundation members Facebook group. So I believe we're gonna put some links down in the chat there. And as a fully volunteer run nonprofit, we do rely on donations to continue running. So if you'd like to support us, maybe you could donate in the amount of your favorite book, whether it's book 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And our next book club session is going to be May 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. So a new book. Yay.
It's been my favorite book club so far, to be honest.
Yeah, me too.
It was great.
Yeah.
Thanks for humoring me in my questions.
No, oh my gosh.
They were great. They were really, really good.
I want to do this all the time.
Yeah. No, and honestly, like book 4 is just so full of stuff. Like we could have continued going for like 4 more hours.
Yeah.
And
you'll
I thought we
know
wouldn't
I
have
can-
enough.
Yeah, I could go on for forever and ever and ever. So thanks for everyone for questions and folks who came and just to listen. I mean, we really appreciate that too. So thanks so much for that. And yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Stay
Bye,
safe.
everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.
See you later. Bye.